Today, China shocked Americans with its reaction to Trump's ultimatum and the new 10-day deadline for dictator Putin to end the war. Beijing stated that they are ready to pay the 100% tariff that Trump promised to impose on China for buying Russian oil. Thus, China rejects Washington's demands to stop trading with the Russians. Nevertheless, negotiations on a trade deal between the two countries are ongoing. And many experts are already convinced that the 10-day deadline was actually set not for Putin but specifically for China, so that they clearly state their position based on which Donald Trump plans to act further regarding the strangling of Russia. Meanwhile, in Russia, they have already stated that they are immune to sanctions and are not afraid of them. I remind you, Putin is asking for all sanctions on Russia to be lifted as a condition for ending the war in Ukraine. My name is Alexei Pechi. Today is July 30th. In this episode, we will discuss the United States-China trade negotiations and China's reaction to Washington's threat to impose a 100% tariff. But before we begin, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, give it a like, leave any comment you want, and be sure to subscribe to my Telegram channel. The link to it is in the description of this video. So, after 2 days of negotiations in Stockholm, representatives of the United States and China stated that although they were unable to find solutions to many contentious issues, overall both sides expressed their willingness to continue the tariff truce, which is set to end on August 12th. At the same time, the Americans noted that any extension of the tariff truce would require the approval of United States President Donald Trump, who is determined not to continue this truce. Since trade negotiations with China are part of his strategy to put pressure on Russia, the parties called the talks constructive and aimed at easing the escalation of the trade war between the world's two largest economies. No significant breakthroughs in the negotiations have been reported, despite the fact that American officials stated that the decision on possibly returning tariffs to triple digits remains with Trump. United States Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent reportedly dampened any expectations regarding the White House chief abandoning the continuation of the tariff truce. But Bessent, hinted quite unambiguously that the 10-day deadline given to Putin also applies to China, so he said Beijing should hurry up. And it won't be like these negotiations will drag on for months anymore. It's important to note here that after months of threatening trade partners with tariffs, Trump signed trade agreements with the European Union, Japan, and Indonesia. There are a few more countries as well. But China's powerful economy and Beijing's control over global rare earth metal flows make these negotiations especially difficult. In May, the United States and China put a pause on imposing these triple-digit tariffs against each other. At that time, the United States imposed a 145% tariff on Chinese imports, while China imposed a 125% tariff on United States imports. But without reaching a final agreement, global supply chains and financial markets may face new turbulence. It's unclear where all this is heading. And now, Scott Bessent added that another meeting between representatives of the United States and China is likely to take place soon. And the agreements on the supply of rare earth elements are becoming more concrete after previous negotiations in Geneva and London. Next, quoting Bessent, good personal relationships and mutual respect have been established. I think we understand their plans much better now. China's chief trade negotiator Li Chenggang said that both sides fully recognize the importance of maintaining stable and strong economic and trade relations. Here's a quote. The economic and trade teams of China and the United States will maintain active dialogue, exchange views on economic and trade issues in a timely manner, and continue to promote the stable and healthy development of bilateral economic and trade relations. And as stated, the negotiations could pave the way for a meeting between Donald Trump and Chinese leader Xi Jinping later this year. Although Trump denies making any special efforts to arrange such a meeting, American officials say that this topic has not been discussed at all yet. And so, on board the plane, Trump said that in his opinion he will meet with Xi Jinping in the fall, although he is not going into details yet. And now analysts believe that China may use its influence on the global rare earth elements market. That's his trump card. Moreover, unlike the European Union, Beijing is not dependent on the United States when it comes to security and can allow trade negotiations to continue there for several more months. China is well aware of its strong negotiating position, which was clearly evident from the temporary escalation that occurred in mid-spring. And that's exactly why Trump is trying to set some kind of time frame for the agreement. You can't conduct these negotiations for months. And what's important here is that United States Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, during these two-day negotiations in Stockholm, stated that Beijing could face large-scale trade sanctions from the United States for continuing to purchase Russian oil. Quote, "The Chinese take their sovereignty very seriously. We don't want to infringe on their sovereignty, so they are ready to pay a 100% duty. Therefore, I think that anyone who buys Russian oil under sanctions should be prepared for this." His comments came just a few hours after United States President Donald Trump officially confirmed that secondary duties against Russia would take effect in 10 days. If the Kremlin does not agree to a ceasefire, setting a deadline for August 7th. But despite growing pressure from the West, Beijing still maintains strong trade and diplomatic ties with Moscow. And China is the largest buyer of Russian crude oil and a key supplier of dual-use components that are essential for the Russian war machine. And now secondary sanctions like those proposed by Washington would target countries and companies doing business with Russia by imposing punitive measures on their access to United States markets. If a third country, in this case China, continues to buy Russian oil, exports to the United States could face an additional 100% tariff, which would significantly raise prices for American consumers and put pressure on Chinese exporters. The United States strategy is aimed at putting pressure on Moscow by limiting its oil revenues, which by the most conservative estimates make up about a third of federal income and remain the most important source of funding for its military efforts. And Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov stated back on July 15th that the threat of imposing tariffs is serious. However, so far Moscow has not responded publicly to the ultimatum at all and, as they say, is waiting for the reaction of its suzerain, that is, China. But it's obvious that the sides did not reach an agreement on oil. Beijing will continue to buy oil from Russia despite the threat of high tariffs from the United States. This was stated by United States Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent following talks with Chinese officials. But here the Americans found yet another argument in favor of putting pressure on Beijing. Bessent pointed to China's supply of dual-use goods to Russia worth over $15 billion, which support Moscow in its war against Ukraine. And interestingly, Bessent directly stated whether the Chinese are ready to enter into a tough trade war with the United States of America again. With these triple-digit tariffs, they should remember that this puts Beijing's relationship at risk. And also with Europe, like the United States and the European Union will coordinate their actions in this direction. Like Beijing shouldn't count on having such a tough trade war with the Americans, but somehow making a deal with the Europeans. Bessent suggests coordinating with Europeans and joining the challenging trade war. Then you'll have to face the same situation in the European market, but at least you'll keep Russian oil for yourselves. Well, it's up to you to choose. Let me note here that China remains the largest importer of Russian oil, buying about 2 million barrels a day, followed by India and Turkey. Nevertheless, the Chinese authorities stated that Beijing will protect its energy independence and make decisions based on national interests. And here, what we've been talking about on this YouTube channel for a long time has finally been revealed publicly. Bessent directly stated that if Beijing does not persuade Moscow to negotiate a settlement of the war in Ukraine within the next 10 days, importers of Russian oil will face 100% tariffs. And first and foremost, it will be China that gets hit. I'll leave it at that for now. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to this channel, like the video, and hit the bell. And friends, if you want to support the work of this channel, you can do this by making a donation on any platform that's convenient for you. All the links and details are in the description of this video or by scanning the QR code on your screen. That's all for now. Take care. Goodbye, everyone. Subtitles created by